Hello and welcome to Chapter 3, Seeking and Receiving Healthcare. First, we're going to distinguish between the concept of disease and illness. Disease is defined as the process of physical damage within the body. So, disease is going to be that actual biological process that's happening within you when you have a disease. So, for example, if you had HIV, the actual infection that's going on within you, or cancer, right? The process in your cells. This is the process of the physical disease. Disease can sometimes exist in the absence of diagnosis. So, for example, you might not know if you have HIV or another disease process going on inside of you, but disease is defined as that actual biological process. Next, we have illness. Illness is the experience of being sick and having a diagnosis of a disease. So, illness is going to be that experience of being sick. So, if you're told you have diabetes, right, or you have AIDS, it's what you experience taking on that role and engaging in behaviors to alleviate your symptoms, right? It's what you do. The behavior that we engage in can be broken up into illness behavior and sick role behavior. Illness behavior consists of the activities undertaken by people who experience symptoms but have not yet received a diagnosis. So if you're dealing with maybe nausea or pain, or you don't feel well, right? You're responding to the process of your body not feeling well. This is going to be your illness behavior, right? This might be things like seeking information about your illness or seeking a diagnosis, engaging in behaviors to alleviate your symptoms. This is going to be illness behavior. Sick role behavior is the behavior that you take on after you have a diagnosis, right? So you've been told by a physician that you're sick with some condition, then you adopt this role of being sick, right? And taking steps to combat or cope with this diagnosis that you have gotten. So what are some of the factors that are going to affect our illness behavior? Right? When we're experiencing symptoms and we're trying to cope with these symptoms, what affects the way we do this? First is going to be our personal factors. So things like our personality and our level of stress and our individual differences are going to be a big factor in how we handle dealing with illness and dealing with our symptoms. Studies have shown that what predicts whether or not we seek medical care isn't the severity of symptoms, but our interpretation of them. So people with more severe symptoms don't necessarily seek medical care at a greater rate than people with less severe symptoms. Rather, people who are more concerned about their symptoms or more stressed out by them are more likely to seek medical care. A huge predictor of how we deal with our symptoms is our level of neuroticism. So if we remember from our intro to psych class, right, neuroticism is going to be a personality trait that makes us very on edge, very stressed out, right, very reactive to things. If we are high on this personality trait, we're going to be more likely to interpret our symptoms as serious and more likely to seek medical care. The next factor we see is gender. Women are more likely than men to use health care. Women tend to report more symptoms. They're more tuned into their symptoms, more likely to experience distress, whereas men are more likely to report only life-threatening symptoms or the very severe symptoms that they experience. This is likely due to the result that the female gender role allows women to seek to seek treatment in reaction to their symptoms. So societal ideas on masculinity and the role that men are supposed to play is a barrier to seeking care when we experience symptoms, when a man experiences symptoms. Age is another factor that influences willingness to seek medical care. Young adults are the most reluctant to seek medical care. So people who are young, they feel kind of fearless, they feel like they're invincible, so they're not as likely as older adults to seek medical care. As people age, they have to decide whether or not their symptoms are something that needs treatment or just a symptom of aging, right? So based on what your age is and what you feel like your symptoms should be and your health should be, that's going to impact whether or not you seek care. So if you're getting older and you start to experience things like pain, maybe some minor digestive problems, oh, this is just aging, right? I'm not as young as I used to be. Where people tend to draw the line between whether they interpret something as aging or something as problematic tends to be where its onset is, right? So if it's a gradual onset of not very severe symptoms, people tend to attribute that to aging. When it's a sudden onset and our symptoms are more severe, people tend to interpret this as something that needs treatment. Our next factor is socioeconomic, ethnic, and cultural factors. People from different cultures have different ways of viewing illness, right? Your background, your culture, where your parents grew up, what your parents told you about how you should interpret your health and your symptoms are going to impact how you interpret it. People who are of higher socioeconomic status, as we talked about in our previous chapters, tend to be healthier. However, they tend to seek medical care at a higher rate, right? So when our high-income populations are sick, they tend to go to the doctor and they tend to seek treatment. This is likely due to greater access, right? Our higher income populations don't worry about paying for the doctor. They have access to good health insurance, so when they experience symptoms, they use that health insurance. We see that our lower income populations are disproportionately represented in hospitalizations, right? They tend to be hospitalized at a higher rate, and this is probably due to that delaying of seeking care, right? Due to the cost prohibitive nature of preventative care. So our lower income populations, they don't seek help with minor symptoms, but they tend to end up hospitalized when they do this. The care is later, right? When the symptoms get more severe and they need to seek help. Studies that have investigated these differences and their roots really do show us that access is a major issue. There was a study in the United Kingdom that looked at different populations and their interpretation of health symptoms, and it showed that respondents who were Black, female, and from lower socioeconomic groups were at least as likely as those who were white, male, and from middle and upper class to make accurate responses to potential medical problems. So they were just as likely to recognize that serious symptoms were serious, right? So signs of things like cancer or heart disease, they recognized that these were serious, however, less likely to seek care. So our different populations are just as likely to understand that they might have a need for care, but we have different access due to socioeconomic status and income. Symptom characteristics are our next factor that's going to influence how and when people seek help. The visibility of the symptom, right? So if it's something that no one can see, right, it's really kind of a hidden symptom, you're less likely to seek care than if it's something that's more obvious to the outside world. As we talked about earlier, the perceived severity of the symptom, right? So if the symptom, this goes in line with if the symptom is stressing you out. If you think that your symptom you're experiencing might be deadly or might have some severe consequences down the line, you are more likely to seek medical care than if you think that your symptom is less serious. Our third symptom characteristic is the extent to which the symptom interferes with your personal life, right? So the more incapacitated and inability to do what it is they typically do, the more likely to seek care. So this is someone who's an athlete is going to be more likely to seek care for an orthopedic type problem than someone who really just has to get through their everyday life, right? Something like ankle pain might not bother you as much if you have a desk job and you don't work out a lot, as opposed to if you're a professional athlete or if you're a very active person. Lastly, we have the frequency and persistence of the symptoms. So if your symptom is intermittent, right, it's not something that you're experiencing every day, you're less likely to seek care than if this is a persistent problem that you're dealing with and it's constantly bothering you or constantly present. Lastly is conceptualization of a disease. It's been shown that people think about diseases in ways that vary substantially from medical explanations, right? So we don't have a very good understanding at times of the way diseases progress and how they work. So people may seek or not seek care based on their inaccurate beliefs about this illness, right? The factors that impact this illness, how long this illness might last, whether it is treatable, what it's caused by, right? How medical care can help you, right? Your conceptualization of your symptoms are likely to impact this. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the sick role behavior. Kazel and Cobb defined the sick role behavior as the activities that are engaged in by people who believe themselves to be ill for the purpose of getting well, right? So remember, we talked about that sick role behavior is after you've been diagnosed with a condition, right? I have this diagnosis. I've been told that I have an illness. How am I going to cope with it? And what am I going to do to get better? Siegel, another researcher, expanded this idea of the sick role behavior and defined it, broke it down into rights and duties. So he says someone who is sick has certain rights that come with this diagnosis, and they also have their duties. So the rights would be to make decisions concerning health-related issues, right? When you have a diagnosis, you have a right to make your own decisions about what treatments and what remedies will work for you. People should have an exemption from normal duties, right? So if you're coping with an illness, that means you can't go to work or you can't do the things that you would otherwise do, you should be exempt from them. And the right to depend on others for assistance, right? So if you're disabled in some way or your medical condition makes it so you need help, you have a right to get that help. The duties that this sick person has, right, in this sick role is to maintain health or the responsibility to get well, right? To cope with this illness and engage in the things they need to do and to get well. The duty to perform routine healthcare management, right? So to attend these appointments that are necessary and to continue to follow up with the practitioner and to use the healthcare services. As we can see, this is a little bit of an idealistic conception of this, right? We might deserve the right to be exempt from our normal duties and to depend on others, but that might not be realistic for a lot of people. Many jobs don't actually give sick time, and still got to pay your rent. A lot of people don't have that support system where they can rely on others to take care of them. And then with our chronic diseases that we're dealing with today, a lot of times people don't actually get better from certain things. Things like chronic diabetes. We're not necessarily ever going to get better. We can mitigate our symptoms, but these are diseases that last for our lifetime. So this is going to be a different situation. These duties and these rights aren't necessarily going to apply, might not work out. So the last topic I want to talk about in this chapter is seeking health information, and specifically using the internet to seek health information. So the internet is a new or newer thing, right? 50 years ago, people didn't have the internet readily available to go research their condition. Lots and lots of studies tell us that most internet users in the United States do report using the internet to seek health-related information, right? There's the joke that if you Google your symptoms, it'll tell you you're dying. We've heard that before. So lots and lots of people, when you have a problem, you Google it. It's a very cultural thing nowadays. Let's ask the internet. There's this wealth of information out there. This is a good and a bad thing because the internet has lots and lots and lots of health information. Much of it is accurate, but a huge portion is also inaccurate. So when we're at home, we Google our symptoms and we look for this information, we get lots of good stuff and lots of bad stuff, and we have to weed through it and understand, right? We have to separate this information and tease apart and figure out what is actually true. There's a number of different ways we can make sure that we're exposing ourselves primarily to the best information. Websites that are .org, .gov, .edu, right? These sources that are trustworthy and put out good information. Things that are associated with hospitals, associated with universities, tend to be great sources. When we see something consistently, right? So if most websites are saying the same thing and most of these websites seem to be credible, that's a lot better than maybe some blogger who's got this fringe information. Now that we engage in this practice of looking up our symptoms on the internet, oftentimes when we go to the doctor, we go in with this knowledge, right? We don't just come in and say, hey, here's my symptoms, tell me what's up, right? A lot of times it's, oh, I Googled this and I I read this and I found out this and I know this. So this is a little bit different physician-patient relationship than existed in the past, because now the patient comes in with all this knowledge. This can benefit the patient a lot when we know things, because it helps us be that step ahead, right? We can have these intelligent, engaging conversations with the doctor. We can ask the questions we need to. We can push and maybe make sure we get the attention and the treatment that we need, but it also can negatively affect the relationship. When people bring in inaccurate information, this is a barrier. If the patient is saying, I know this and I found this on the internet, and the doctor's saying that's not true, there's a little bit of a tension there, a little bit of a difficulty, and it a little bit cuts the physician's authority, which is a double-edged sword, right? It can be a good thing and a bad thing. So just things to be aware of as we use the internet to seek our health information and when we bring this information to medical appointments. Understanding how to find good information and navigating how to make this information a positive thing as we seek out treatment.